Okay, so usually when I create an exam for CS3220, I would first do this exam myself. If I can complete the exam in around 14 minutes, I would consider the exam of reasonable difficulty. So this time I'm going to record it, and later on after the midterm, I'll post a video just as an additional kind of demonstration of how to develop a web application. So let's first look at the exam description. In this exam, we are going to develop a web application that manages online polls. We all know what online polls look like. We are going to use MVC architecture, of course. And the main page will list the existing polls. If you look at this, it's not too different from guestbook. It's going to be a table and a few entries. And then if we click on an entry or a poll, in this case, it displays the poll which contains a question and a number of possible answers. An important thing here is that some poll are single choice and some are multiple choice. Depending on whether it's single choice or multiple choice, we want to display either checkboxes or radio buttons. And then if we click on this link, a user should be able to add additional answers to a poll. And then if we click on this link, a user should be able to add a new poll, basically specifying the question and then whether excuse me, whether it's single choice or not, and then later on the user can continue to add new answers. So this is basically what we want to do. And if we look at the grading part, it's clear that there are 4 operations to implement. Remember, almost all web applications are data plus operations on the data. And the first step is always to create a model class or some model classes. Good model class design makes operation implementation a lot easier. Bad model class design would make implementation quite a bit harder. So here we will start with our model class design, and obviously we need to store polls, and each poll would be an object. And inside each poll, we also has a number of answers, and each answer, since there's nothing else, they are simply strings. We do need to have additional attributes to tell us whether it's a single choice or multiple choice poll. Okay, so knowing that, let's create the project. It's going to be a dynamic web project, and I'm going to call it Midterm. And so, come on. Okay, so now we have the project, and the first thing we do is to create a model class, and I'm going to put this under 3220 model package as usual, and I'm going to call this poll. So a poll has a question and a list of answers, and it also needs to have a Boolean field that tells us whether it's single choice or not. So we'll have a Boolean field which says single choice, and yeah, that's more or less it. We of course want the getters and setters. We do want to have an ID. If you remember when we created our guestbook entry class, it's beneficial to have an ID because later on when we try to edit something, or in this case add answers to a poll, it's better to refer to the poll using an ID. And we'll use an ID seed here that will automatically generate new IDs. And then let's create a constructor so that this one will get the ID. And I also like to initialize my collection fields so that they are not null. They may be empty, but they are not null. Otherwise, oftentimes when we try to access it, we have to check whether it's empty or null. So now we know for sure that they are not null. So now let's generate getters and setters and generate everything except ID seed, and let's format it a little bit. Okay, so this would be our model class. Looks reasonable. And then let's create our first operation. And the first operation will be list polls. And we'll create the controller first, and then the controller will call it list polls. And this one will be responsible for initializing some application scope data, to store the polls managed by the application. So I'm going to include the init method. And here, so inside the init method, the first thing we do is we call super init, otherwise there will be a null pointer exception. And then let's create a list of polls. I think I put this in the wrong project. Can I move this directly from here to here? Let me create a package first. Let's call it controller. And let's move this one to here. And okay, so now it's in the right place. Import. Why it doesn't let me import this one? Okay, so import. And import one more. Okay, so let's create one poll. We don't want to create too many. It will be kind of a waste of time, and in exam, time is important. So let's create one poll. So we'll say new poll, and let's say the question is what we have here. Let's choose this one. Question is favorite programming language. What programming language do we know? Oh, programming language. Let's just say programming languages. And we'll say answers will be want to add a few answers. So it's get answers, add, and let's add Java, and let's add Python. And this one is a multiple choice, so we'll say set single choice to false. Well, single choice would by default would be false by default, so we don't really need to set it. And then we need to save this in application scope so we can later on use it. Get servlet context, set attribute, and post. Okay, so that gives us some data to test our first operation, and the first operation just displays something, so doesn't really need to post, and in fact it doesn't really need to do anything other than just forwarding the request. So it will be request get request dispatcher, and we forward it to display post. So I usually want to have my views to be the same as my controllers. It's easier to locate them. And the reason we don't have to forward any data is because JSPs can access data in application scope. So now let's create our first JSP, and it will be called list post. And we'll need to use JSTL. So let me copy over the JSTL taglib directive, and this one, that is okay. So this one will be our main page, and inside here we need to have a table. Each table will list one poll. Okay, so let's have the table. Nothing fancy. Do we need table titles? No. Okay, and then we'll do a for each. Items will be the post, and variable name will be poll, and for each one we'll create a row, and the first cell in the row is a poll question, and the second one will be the poll, no, not poll answer, it will be add answers. So let's just look at answers for now. Okay, so this is pretty much our first operation, and let's run it and see how it looks like. So we have a for not found, and pay attention to the error message. It says webinf display poll.jsp not found. It shouldn't be called display poll. It should be called list polls. So should be called list polls. And wait a little bit. Does it restart? It doesn't restart. Let's okay, so now it's restarted. We refresh again. It doesn't show anything. So it shows the table, but not anything inside. That means it's not getting the application scope thing, is it? Oh, that's because we forgot to add this poll into the list. So it does get the application scope polls, but it's empty. So I need to say polls.add poll. Okay, so wait a little bit until it restarts and then refresh. Okay, so now we have our first operation implemented. Okay, and then what do we do next? Well, let's do this one. So we want to display a poll, and when we click on a link, we want to display this poll, and the link, of course, should contain something that tells us which poll we're trying to get. That, of course, means we would want to embed the ID of the poll here. So let's change this one a little bit. So we'll say this one, and it will go to a new controller called display poll, and the ID is going to be poll.id. And okay, and this is changed to JSP. So to change this to JSP, we don't have to wait until the server reload. It doesn't reload anyway. We can simply refresh the browser and it will load the new JSP. And if we click on it, it shows that it goes to display poll and with ID 1. So we haven't created that one yet, so of course we don't get anything, but that's okay. We are going to create a new servlet, and this one is going to be called display poll. And this one, display poll, again, it's just display things, and there's no do post. So we'll get rid of this, we'll get rid of this, we'll get rid of this, get rid of all this, and get rid of do post. Okay, so here we will have the ID, which comes from request parameter, of course, and so we do an integer plus int and request get parameter ID here, and so then we need to get the list of posts. So we'll say post is get servlet context, get attribute post, and annoyingly we have to do a cast. And also kind of annoyingly, we want to add a suppress warning, but we get the post, and then we need to locate the one that we want to display. So that means, what does that mean? That means we need to, yeah, so let's create a variable first, and then we'll say for each poll in polls, if p dot get id equals to id, we'll say poll is p and rate, something like that. Okay, so this should grab the poll that has the given ID, and then what we need to do is simply pass that to the page to display. So to pass that to the view to display. And the way we do that is, of course, to request set attribute. And so this one is going to be this, and why it gives me an error? May not have been initialized. Okay, so let's initialize it to null. Shouldn't be, but and then we'll do a request gets dispatcher forward again, and this time we'll forward it to display poll. All right, so now we have our second controller, and we need to have our second view. This one will be display poll, and here we simply display a question and then the answers. So it will be something like question, and then we need to display a number of answers that of course requires a for each. And we'll say C for each items is, this time the items are the answers, so it will be poll.answers, and the variable name will be called answer or anything basically. And okay, so we don't need to display ordered or unordered list or anything, so let's just use div. For each div we give it an answer. Now we also need to display either radio button or checkbox, and that depends on whether the poll is single choice or not. So we'll have to do a see if here. So see if this thing is a single choice, how do I do single choice? If this single choice is true, that means we want to display a input type radio button. Radio. So it's just for display purpose, nothing else. So we don't really need to put in name and other stuff. And what if it's not true? Unfortunately, there's no else in JSTL. So either we use C truth with when and otherwise, or we use to see if. So something like this. Let's see. We'll find out. So let's run this. Number exception now display poll. Oh, that means just because nothing is specified as a request parameter. We shouldn't start with display poll anyway. We should start with list polls and click on this. Okay, so it does work, and it's showing checkbox because this one is not single choice. Okay, so that handles the second one, and let's do the third one, which is add answers. And okay, so what do we do with add answers? Oh, okay, so add answers is kind of similar to this one, and it doesn't even require displaying the checkboxes, and so we can basically just use this one and then add a form. Okay, so that's what we'll do. We'll say add answers. Add answers. And so add answers will be, at least part of it will be similar to display poll, because we still need to display the poll and then add answers to it. So I'm going to actually just copy and paste the whole do get here. What am I doing? Control V. Okay, so yes. So this is what it looks like. The display part is, or the do get part is pretty much the same as that one. So we still get a request parameter. We still find out which poll to display, and then here we'll go to add answers. And then later, somebody will enter a new option or new answer and click add, and that should submit back to do post. So inside do post, we need to have at least two parameters, ID, which tells us which poll this answer should be added to. So we still need this. And then we'll also need one, which is the new answer. And request parameter, let's call it answer. And we'll need to do the same thing here again. And this basically tells us that we should make this into a method, but we'll do that later if we have plenty of time left. So this will give us the poll that we need to add answer to, and then we'll say poll get answers, add answer. So this will add the answer, and after that, where should we display? Where should we go? After a new answer is added, should be redirected back to add answers. Okay, so we'll do a response, send redirect, and this one will redirect back to add answers. So redirect back to add answers. Notice that we'll do a redirect. It will send a get request as the second request, meaning that we'll redirect, it will come back to do get. So you obviously don't want to redirect to do post, which will then keep adding answers again and again. So this would be pretty much the controller part. We'll see if it works or not. And as I mentioned earlier, the add answers looks quite similar to display poll, so we'll copy and paste this one and call it add answers. And add answers. So same thing. We don't even need to have this. We do need to have a form. So let's add a form. Action, don't need it. And we'll do post, of course. And inside we'll have input, which is a text field, and the name is answer. And what else do we need? We need an add button. So we'll add a button called add, something like this. Again, we'll see if it works. Let's try this. Oh, we need to change list post to add that link to add answers. So this one will be similar to this one. Except that it will say add answers. Let's close the tag. Okay, so now let's try again. Why I always try run display poll? It should be list post. Okay, so right now we have two programming language, Java and Python. Let's add one. Let's say we add PHP. Okay, number format exception. That means we are not getting the ID, which is because we are not getting ID here. Why we are not getting ID here? I thought we have ID here. So when we post to it, shouldn't it post it to add answer with the query parameter ID is 1? And for some reason, it's not posting to this link. It's just posting to add answers. Okay, so that's okay. What we do is we, of course, can do type hidden, and the name is ID, and value is ID, of course. This should do the trick. Let's see. So refresh. It has PHP again. Oh, I know. It's not because we're not posting to it. It's because when we redirect, we didn't redirect with the ID. That's why. Okay. Okay, now I know. So we actually don't need this. The error is when we post it, it's working, but when we redirect, we need to have an ID in there. So we'll say redirect ID plus ID. So this should do the trick. Okay, let's go back and refresh and two answers. Add an answer, PHP, add. Okay, now it works. Notice that when we redirect, we still need the ID there, and if we add C, fortune, all works. Okay, so now we are done with the third operation, and then let's implement the fourth one, create poll. So let's, okay, let me close my door. My son just came in. And so here we want to have a link, of course, and this link will be called create poll. And let's go back, refresh. Okay, so if I click on create poll, right now nothing, and this one is just a typical form processing operation, display a form and then process a form. So let's create that. We'll do create poll. in do get is pretty straightforward. We just do a forward and we'll forward the user to create poll, and that view will display this form, and then inside do post, we'll say we'll create a new poll, and the question of the new poll will be request.get parameter, let's call it question, so whichever name we give this field. And then there's also a second one called single choice, and this one is a checkbox. The tricky thing about checkbox is that if it's checked, it will be submitted, and if it's not checked, it won't be submitted, so you won't get any request parameter. But the good thing about that is that we can simply use whether request get parameter single choice is null or not to determine whether it's single choice or not. So we'll say set single choice, which is request get parameter single, let's call it single, not null. So if it's not null, that means it's single choice. If it is null, that means this checkbox is unchecked. That means it's not single choice. Okay, so once again, we need to grab the polls. And then we need to add the new poll. And where do we need to redirect it? After poll is created, it should be add answers. Okay, so we'll do response send redirect add answers. Remember, add answers want ID, so the ID will be poll.addID, something like that. Okay, so this looks reasonable, and let's create the view, which is called create poll. Create poll, and what do we have here? Question, single choice. Okay, pretty simple. This one is the create poll, and the form is don't really need action, but we want to use post. And so question is, let's use a couple of divs. First div is question, and it's a text field, and the name is going to be called question. And then we'll have a checkbox. It's a checkbox, and name is single, and that's because we used single here. And then we need to have a button, so let's create a button. And the button will be called create. Okay, so let's see what it looks like. And this time I'm going to run list pose. And we say create poll. Oh, doesn't show a label, so the label is on the right hand side. So let's say single choice. Okay, not the best looking font, but that's okay for exam. And let's create this one, greatest basketball player of all time, and we'll say greatest b-ball player, and it should be a single choice. So let's say MJ, of course, and LeBron James, and Magic, Russ. Okay, so well, okay, so let's add a link to say back to post. Where is add-ins? Here. Let's add a link to back to post. Of course, it's list post. Okay, so this one shows radio buttons. Again, it's just for show, so it doesn't really matter. The user can click all of them. And this one shows checkboxes. And if I add one more here, okay, so that should do it.